In the heart of a quiet suburban neighborhood, where manicured lawns stretched endlessly and white picket fences stood like sentinels, life moved at a leisurely pace. The streets were lined with families who knew each other by name. Children, riding bikes down the sidewalks and dogs barking playfully in backyards. It was the kind of place people dreamed of living in, a sanctuary from the chaos of the city. But beneath its serene surface, tensions simmered, waiting for the right moment to boil over. Karen lived in one of the largest houses on Maple Lane, a two-story colonial-style home complete with flower boxes bursting with vibrant blooms. To her, neighbors, Karen appeared as someone deeply invested in keeping the community perfect. She chaired the neighborhood watch committee, organized annual block parties, and always had something to say about how others maintained their properties. Her sharp eyes missed nothing. The slightest crack in someone's driveway or an unkempt hedge would send her into a frenzy. And yet, despite her efforts to present herself as a pillar of the community, many found her intrusive and difficult to deal with. Karen's personality was a mix of self-righteousness and paranoia. She believed it was her duty to enforce what she called community standards, though these standards often seemed arbitrary and rooted more in personal preference than actual rules. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors about her behavior, calling her everything from nosy to downright rude. Still, no one dared confront her directly because they feared her wrath. Or worse, another round of passive-aggressive emails copied to the entire neighborhood list. One sunny Saturday morning, Karen sat on her porch sipping coffee while scanning the street through oversized sunglasses. Everything looked normal until her gaze landed on the house next door. For weeks now, the property had been vacant, but today, there was activity. A sleek black sedan was parked in the driveway, and a tall man was unloading cardboard boxes from the trunk. He wore a crisp shirt rolled up at the sleeves and dark slacks that hinted at professionalism. His movements were deliberate and calm, exuding an air of quiet confidence that immediately rubbed Karen the wrong way. She squinted, trying to get a better look. Who was he? Why hadn't anyone mentioned a new neighbor moving in? More importantly, why did he look so different? Karen prided herself on knowing everyone within a 5-mile radius, and this stranger didn't fit her mental image of Maple Lane residents. His skin was a rich shade of brown, his features strikingly handsome, and his demeanor radiated authority. Something about him unsettled her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Unable to contain her curiosity, or perhaps her suspicion, Karen set down her coffee mug and marched across the neatly trimmed grass separating their yards. As she approached, the man glanced up, his expression neutral but polite. Before he could greet her, Karen blurted out, "What are you doing here?" The question hung awkwardly in the air. The man blinked, clearly taken aback by her tone, then replied evenly, "I'm moving in, I just bought the house." "Oh," Karen said, her lips pursing into a thin line. "Well, I'm your neighbor, Karen." She extended a hand, though. Her grip was firmer than necessary, almost challenging. "Nice to meet you, Karen. I'm Marcus Thompson," he said, shaking her hand briefly before returning to his task. Karen lingered, watching him unload the car. "So, where are you from?" she asked, her voice laced with thinly veiled skepticism. Marcus paused again, this time turning to face her fully. There was a flicker of amusement in his eyes, though his tone remained courteous. "Chicago originally, but I've lived all over. Work takes me places." "Work?" Karen pressed, unable to hide her eagerness to pry further. "I'm in law enforcement," Marcus answered vaguely, not wanting to divulge too much information to someone he'd just met. Karen frowned. Law enforcement? That sounded official, but it didn't ease her discomfort. In her mind, people like Marcus didn't belong in neighborhoods like this. They disrupted the harmony she worked so hard to maintain. She nodded stiffly, offering a forced smile. "Well, welcome to the neighborhood, I suppose. Just make sure you keep things tidy around here. We take pride in our appearance." With that, she spun on her heel and headed back to her porch, leaving Marcus standing there with a bemused expression. He shook his head slightly, chuckling under his breath. Little did Karen know, Marcus wasn't just any ordinary man. Beneath, his composed exterior lay years of experience leading teams, solving complex cases and navigating high-pressure situations. As the newly appointed chief of the FBI, Marcus had seen it all, and he certainly wasn't intimidated by someone like Karen. Back on her porch, Karen stewed in frustration. Something about Marcus bothered her, though she couldn't articulate exactly what. Maybe it was his confidence or the way he carried himself with such poise. Or maybe it was simply the fact that he didn't seem fazed by her attempts to assert dominance. Whatever it was, Karen resolved to keep a close eye on him. After all, it was her responsibility to ensure the neighborhood stayed safe, and if that meant investigating every detail of his life, so be it. Little did Karen realize, however, that her actions were setting the stage for a confrontation unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Her assumptions and prejudices were about to collide head-on with reality, forcing her to confront truth she wasn't prepared to face. And Marcus, for his part, wasn't going to let ignorance slide, not when he had the power to turn the tables in ways Karen couldn't possibly imagine. Over the next few weeks, Karen's curiosity about Marcus turned into outright obsession. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him, though she struggled to pinpoint exactly what it was. Every time she saw him leaving, for work in his sharp suits or coming home with groceries, her mind raced with questions. Who was he really? Why had he chosen their neighborhood? And most importantly, why did he seem so unfazed by her constant scrutiny? Karen began documenting everything. She noted the times Marcus left the house and returned, jotting them down in a small notebook she kept hidden in her kitchen drawer. She peeked through her curtains whenever his car pulled into the driveway, watching as he unloaded packages or greeted delivery drivers with a smile. To Karen, these activities seemed suspicious, not because they were unusual, but because they defied her expectations. In her mind, people like Marcus weren't supposed to blend in so seamlessly. They were supposed to stick out, give her a reason to justify her discomfort. Her irritation reached a boiling point one afternoon when Marcus decided to tackle some outdoor chores. He spent hours trimming hedges, mowing the lawn, and painting the fence, a project that transformed his once-neglected yard into something neat and inviting. But instead of being impressed, Karen grew increasingly agitated. How dare he make such an effort? Didn't he know his presence alone disrupted the balance of the neighborhood? That evening, as Karen watered her own garden, she marched over to Marcus's property under the pretense of offering advice. "You know," she said loudly enough for nearby neighbors to hear, "you really should have hired someone to do that. It's not proper to handle such manual labor yourself." Marcus paused mid-stroke, paintbrush in hand, and raised an eyebrow. "I appreciate the suggestion, Karen, but I enjoy doing things myself. Keeps me grounded." His calm response only fueled her frustration. Grounded? What did that even mean? People like him didn't talk like that, or at least not according to Karen's narrow worldview. Determined to rattle him, she pressed on. "Well, you might want to double-check your mailbox alignment. It's slightly crooked, and we do take pride in appearances around here." Marcus glanced at the mailbox, then back at her, his expression unreadable. "Thanks for pointing that out. I'll fix it tomorrow." With nothing left to criticize, Karen huffed and retreated to her porch, muttering under her breath about how Marcus clearly didn't understand how things worked in Maple Lane. But her grievances didn't stop there. Over the following days, she found more reasons to complain. His trash cans were left too close to the curb, his porch light stayed on late at night, and his car engine idled longer than necessary when he warmed it up in the mornings. Each minor infraction became ammunition in her campaign to prove that Marcus didn't belong. The tension between them escalated one warm Friday evening when Marcus hosted a small gathering in his backyard. Friends and family had come over to celebrate his first month in the neighborhood, filling the air with laughter, music, and the savory aroma of grilled food. The scene was lively but far from disruptive. Marcus had made sure to keep the volume low and invited only a handful of guests. Still, Karen saw red. Peering through her blinds, she watched as Marcus mingled with his visitors, laughing and chatting, effortlessly. Her blood pressure spiked. How dare he act so carefree? Didn't he realize the impact his actions had on the rest of the street? Clutching her phone tightly, she dialed the local police department, ready to report a disturbance. When near, the officer on the line asked for details. Karen hesitated briefly before launching into a rehearsed tirade. "There's a man at 24 Maple Lane causing trouble," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. "He's having some sort of party and it's way too loud. Plus, he looks suspicious. You need to send someone right away." On the other end of the line, the officer assured her they'd send a patrol car to investigate. Satisfied, Karen hung up and settled onto her couch, a smug grin spreading across her face. Finally, she thought, Marcus would get what was coming to him. Meanwhile, Marcus was completely unaware of the storm brewing just a few houses away. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, he raised a glass to toast his friends. "To new beginnings," he said warmly, unaware that his quiet suburban life was about to take a dramatic turn. Less than 30 minutes later, 2 police cruisers rolled down Maple Lane, their flashing lights piercing the twilight. Neighbors peered out of their windows, wondering what all the commotion was about. Karen stood behind her curtain, anticipation bubbling inside her as the officers approached Marcus's house. Marcus, hearing the sound of sirens, stepped out onto his porch, puzzled. When he saw the uniformed figures walking toward him, realization dawned. Someone must have called the cops, but who? And why? As the officers introduced themselves, Marcus remained composed, extending a polite greeting. Then, without hesitation, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his FBI badge, holding it up for them to see. The officers froze, their expressions shifting instantly from casual professionalism to wide-eyed respect. "Chief Thompson?" one of them stammered, glancing at his partner in disbelief. "We didn't realize this was your residence. We received a complaint about noise." Marcus nodded, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Ah, I see. Well, as you can tell, we're keeping things pretty low-key. No issues here." The officers exchanged awkward glances, clearly embarrassed by the mix-up. After apologizing profusely, they promised to look into the source of the complaint and left as quickly as they'd arrived. Back inside her house, Karen watched the entire exchange unfold through her window. Her jaw dropped as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. Marcus wasn't just any ordinary neighbor, he was the chief of the FBI. The weight of her actions hit her like a ton of bricks. Panic set in as she scrambled to process what had just happened. Had the officers seen her peeking? Would Marcus figure out it was her who made the call? For the first time in years, Karen felt genuinely afraid, not of Marcus himself, but of the consequences her prejudice might bring. She sank onto her couch, staring blankly at the wall, unsure of what to do next. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to his guests, brushing off the incident with a laugh. But deep down, he knew exactly who had called the police, and he also knew that this wouldn't be the end of it. The next morning, the neighborhood was abuzz with whispers about the previous night's incident. Neighbors who had peeked out of their windows during the police visit couldn't help but speculate about what had happened. Some were amused by the absurdity of it all, while others felt a mix of embarrassment and pity for whoever had called the authorities over such a minor issue. Karen, however, stayed indoors, avoiding eye contact with anyone who passed by her house. She knew she was the center of attention, and not in a good way. For Marcus, life went on as usual. He woke up early, enjoyed a cup of coffee on his porch, and prepared for another day at work. But unlike most mornings, he paused to reflect on the events of the previous evening. The call to the police hadn't surprised him. In fact, he'd expected something like this sooner or later. What did surprise him, though, was how blatant Karen's prejudice had been. It wasn't just ignorance. It was calculated hostility masked as concern for the community. Still, Marcus wasn't one to hold grudges without reason. He believed in giving people a chance to explain themselves before passing judgment. So, after finishing his breakfast, he decided to pay Karen a visit. Dressed in a crisp suit that screamed authority, He walked across the neatly trimmed grass separating their properties and knocked firmly on her front door. Inside, Karen nearly jumped out of her skin when she heard the knock. Her heart raced as she peeked through the peephole, confirming her worst fear. Marcus was standing on her doorstep. For a moment, she considered pretending she wasn't home, but curiosity got the better of her. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door cautiously, plastering on a fake smile. "Good morning, Karen," Marcus said, his tone polite but firm. "Do you have a minute to talk?" Karen nodded stiffly, stepping aside to let him in. Her living room was immaculately clean, every cushion fluffed and every surface dust-free, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside her mind. She gestured for Marcus to sit, then perched nervously on the edge of an armchair across from him. "I assume you know why I'm here?" Marcus began, cutting straight to the point. When Karen didn't respond, he continued. "Last night, someone called the police on me, claimed there was a disturbance at my house. Imagine my surprise when I found out it came from this address." Karen's face flushed crimson. She opened her mouth to deny it, but no words came out. There was no use lying. Not when Marcus clearly already knew the truth. Instead, she stammered, I thought, the noise." "The noise?" Marcus repeated, raising an eyebrow. "My friends and I were talking quietly in the backyard. We weren't blasting music or causing any trouble, and yet someone decided to report me to the police. Care to explain why?" Karen fidgeted uncomfortably, twisting her hands in her lap. "It's just, well, you're new here, and I didn't know who you were. You could have been anyone. People need to be careful these days." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "So, because I'm new, and because of how I look, you assumed I was dangerous?" "No," Karen protested quickly, though her voice wavered. "That's not what I meant. I was just looking out for the neighborhood." "And what exactly does looking out for the neighborhood mean to you, Karen?" Marcus asked, his tone sharp enough to make her flinch. "Does it mean singling out people based on their race? Making assumptions about them before even getting to know them?" Karen stared at the floor, unable to meet his eyes. She wanted to defend herself, to argue that she wasn't racist, that she simply cared about keeping things orderly. But the word stuck in her throat. Deep down, she knew Marcus was right. Her actions had been driven by bias, not logic. Seeing her discomfort, Marcus softened his tone slightly. "Look, Karen, I understand that misunderstandings happen. But calling the police on someone isn't a harmless mistake. It has real consequences. For me, it's inconvenient. For others, it can be life-threatening." Karen swallowed hard, guilt washing over her. She hadn't thought about it that way before. To her, dialing 911 had seemed like a harmless way to assert control, to remind Marcus that he didn't belong. Now she realized how reckless and selfish her actions had been. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Marcus studied her for a moment, searching for sincerity in her apology. Finally, he sighed and reached into his pocket, pulling out a business card. "This is my contact information," he said, handing it to her. "If you ever want to learn more about diversity and inclusion, or if you feel the need to report something legitimate, feel free to reach out. But moving forward, I expect better from you. Got it?" Karen nodded vigorously, clutching the card like a lifeline. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Chief Thompson." With that, Marcus stood and headed for the door. As he stepped outside, he glanced back at Karen, who was still sitting frozen in her chair. For the first time since meeting her, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this could be a turning point for her. Over the next few days, Karen struggled to come to terms with what had happened. She replayed the conversation with Marcus over and over in her head, cringing at how defensive and clueless she'd sounded. The weight of her actions pressed heavily on her conscience, making it hard to focus on anything else. She avoided going outside, fearing judgment from her neighbors, and canceled plans with friends, claiming she was feeling unwell. But avoidance wasn't a solution, and Karen knew it. One afternoon, while scrolling aimlessly through social media, she stumbled upon an article about racial profiling and its impact on communities. At first, she skimmed it dismissively, convinced it wouldn't apply to her situation. But as she read further, certain lines jumped out at her. When we allow stereotypes to dictate our behavior, we perpetuate cycles of inequality and mistrust. We must challenge our own biases, even when it's uncomfortable. These words struck a chord deep within Karen. For years, she'd prided herself on being a model citizen, someone who upheld values of fairness and justice. Yet here she was, guilty of the very behaviors she claimed to oppose. How had she become so blind to her own flaws? Determined to make amends, Karen pulled out Marcus's business card and typed the number into her phone. Her fingers hovered over the keypad as she debated whether to send a text or call directly. In the end, she opted for a simple message. "Hi, Chief Thompson. This is Karen from next door. I appreciate your patience with me, and I'd like to take responsibility for my actions. If you're willing, I'd love to learn more about the resources you mentioned." To her relief, Marcus replied almost immediately. "Thank you for reaching out, Karen. That's a step in the right direction. Let's schedule a time to discuss further." Their exchange marked the beginning of a long and challenging journey for Karen. Over the following weeks, Marcus introduced her to workshops, online courses, and community events focused on promoting understanding and dismantling prejudice. At first, Karen attended reluctantly, rolling her eyes at discussions about privilege and systemic racism. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, her perspective began to shift. One seminar, in particular, left a lasting impression on her. A panel of speakers shared personal stories about being unfairly targeted by law enforcement, landlords, and employers simply because of their race. Their accounts were raw and emotional, painting a vivid picture of the struggles Karen had never fully understood. By the end of the session, tears streamed down her face as she realized the extent of the harm caused by attitudes like hers. As Karen worked to educate herself, Marcus kept a watchful eye on her progress. He checked in periodically, offering guidance and encouragement when needed. While their relationship remained uneasy, Karen's efforts to change earned her a measure of respect, even if it was cautious and conditional. For Marcus, seeing Karen's transformation reinforced his belief in the power of accountability. He knew not everyone would respond as positively as she had, but witnessing her growth gave him hope that meaningful change was possible, even in places where it seemed least likely. As the weeks turned into months, Karen found herself navigating uncharted territory. For years, she had prided herself on being in control of her home, her neighborhood, and even the people around her. But now, for the first time in her life, she felt like a student sitting at the feet of teachers who challenged everything she thought she knew. The journey wasn't easy. It was uncomfortable, humbling, and often overwhelming. Yet with each passing day, Karen began to see glimpses of clarity that she had never experienced before. The seminars Marcus recommended became a regular part of her routine. At first, attending them felt like punishment, a penance for her past mistakes. She walked into those rooms filled with apprehension, expecting judgment from others. But instead, she found compassion. The facilitators weren't there to shame her but to educate her, helping her understand how deeply ingrained biases could shape behavior without conscious intent. They spoke about empathy, listening actively, and recognizing privilege, all concepts that initially made Karen bristle but eventually resonated with her on a deeper level. One particular workshop stood out. It was led by a woman named Lisa, a community organizer known for her ability to bridge divides. During one session, Lisa asked participants to pair up and share experiences where they felt misunderstood or unfairly judged. Karen hesitated when it was her turn to speak. Her instinct was to downplay her own struggles, fearing they wouldn't compare to the stories of discrimination shared by others. But something about Lisa's gentle encouragement pushed her to open up. "I have always cared about my community," Karen began haltingly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I realize now that I let fear guide me more than kindness. I saw differences as threats instead of opportunities to learn. And because of that, I hurt someone." Her admission hung heavy in the air. Across from her, her partner, a young, black man named Jamal, nodded thoughtfully. "It takes courage to admit that," he said softly. Not everyone would. Karen looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. In that moment, she realized how much damage her actions must have caused, not just to Marcus, but to countless others whose lives were disrupted by similar prejudices. The guilt she carried weighed heavily, but so did the determination to do better. Outside of the workshops, Karen started making small changes in her daily life. She began reading books written by authors from diverse backgrounds, immersing herself in stories that expanded her worldview. She subscribed to podcasts discussing race relations and social justice, listening intently during her morning walks. Slowly but surely, these efforts chipped away at the walls she had built around herself, allowing her to see the world through a different lens. Marcus noticed the shift. While their interactions remained formal, he couldn't deny that Karen was trying. She no longer complained about trivial matters or scrutinized his every move. Instead, she greeted him warmly when their paths crossed and even offered to help with yard work one weekend. Though Marcus accepted her gesture graciously, he remained cautious, knowing that true change required consistency over time. One evening, as autumn leaves swirled in the crisp air, Marcus decided to test Karen's progress. He invited her over for dinner, explaining that it was a casual gathering with a few close friends. Karen was taken aback by the invitation but accepted eagerly, seeing it as an opportunity to prove she was serious about rebuilding trust. When she arrived at Marcus's house, she was greeted by a lively group of people chatting and laughing. In the living room, there were faces of all shades, accents from different corners of the world, and conversations ranging from politics to pop culture. Karen felt out of place at first, unsure of how to contribute. But as the night wore on, she found herself drawn into discussions about food, travel, and shared experiences. For the first time in years, she listened more than she spoke, absorbing the richness of perspectives that surrounded her. At one point, Marcus approached her with a glass of wine in hand. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his tone light, but probing. Karen smiled nervously. "Honestly, this is nice. I didn't expect to feel so welcome." "You earned it," Marcus replied simply, though his expression suggested he still held some reservations. "Just keep showing up, Karen. That's all anyone can ask." His words stayed with her long after the evening ended. As she drove home, Karen reflected on how far she'd come since that fateful night when the police showed up at Marcus's door. Back then, she had been defensive, quick to justify her actions without considering their impact. Now she understood that growth meant owning her mistakes and actively working to prevent them in the future. The following week, Karen took another step forward. During a neighborhood meeting, she stood up to address the group, an act that once came naturally to her but now filled her with nerves. Clearing her throat, she began, "I want to apologize for something I did recently. Some of you may know that I called the police on our neighbor, Marcus Thompson. At the time, I told myself I was protecting the community, but the truth is, I acted out of bias. I let fear and ignorance cloud my judgment, and I hurt someone in the process." A hush fell over the room. Neighbors exchanged glances, some nodding approvingly while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Karen continued, her voice trembling but resolute. "Since then, I've been learning about the harm caused by racial profiling and prejudice. I'm committed to doing better. Not just for myself, but for all of us. If anyone wants to join me in this journey, I'd be grateful for your support." When she finished speaking, applause broke out, tentative at first but growing louder as more people joined in. Marcus, seated quietly in the back, watched with a faint smile. He didn't stand to acknowledge her speech, nor did he offer public praise. But later, as the meeting concluded, he approached her privately. "I'm proud of you, Karen," he said, his words carrying genuine warmth. "What you did tonight wasn't easy, but it's exactly what leadership looks like." Karen nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything. I hope someday we can truly be neighbors, not just people living next door." Marcus extended his hand, and this time, Karen shook it firmly, feeling a sense of connection she hadn't dared to imagine months earlier. It was a fragile bond, built on accountability and mutual effort, but it was a start. As the days passed, Karen continued to grow. She volunteered at local charities, attended cultural festivals, and struck up conversations with neighbors she'd previously ignored. Each interaction reminded her of how interconnected their community truly was, and how much richer it became when everyone contributed equally. Meanwhile, Marcus kept a watchful eye, ensuring that Karen's transformation wasn't merely performative. He appreciated her efforts but remained vigilant, knowing that old habits could resurface if left unchecked. Still, he allowed himself to feel a measure of optimism. Perhaps, he thought, this quiet suburban neighborhood could serve as a microcosm of broader societal change, one person, one conversation, one apology at a time. Karen's transformation wasn't an overnight miracle. It was slow, messy, and fraught with moments of doubt, for both her and those around her. While some neighbors admired her willingness to confront her biases, others remained skeptical. After all, actions speak louder than words, and Karen still had a lot to prove if she wanted to rebuild trust within the community. One chilly November morning, as frost clung to the grass and the sun peeked hesitantly over the horizon, Karen found herself standing outside Marcus's house once again. This time, however, she wasn't there to complain or spy. Instead, she carried a basket filled with homemade muffins, a gesture she hoped would convey sincerity. She knocked lightly on his door, half expecting him not to answer. But when Marcus opened it, he looked surprised, yet amused. "Good morning," Karen said, holding out the basket. "I made these, thought you might like them." Marcus raised an eyebrow but accepted the gift graciously. "Thank you, Karen. That's very kind." "It's nothing," Karen replied quickly, fidgeting with the hem of her coat. Well, I figured it was about time I did something nice instead of causing trouble." Marcus chuckled softly. "A step in the right direction. Thanks for thinking of me." Their brief exchange was polite but distant, a reflection of how far they'd come while also acknowledging the work that still lay ahead. For Karen, every small interaction with Marcus felt like a test. She knew she couldn't undo the harm she'd caused, but she could show up consistently, proving that her apology wasn't just lip service. Over the next few weeks, Karen threw herself into community projects with newfound enthusiasm. She joined a local initiative aimed at beautifying public spaces, spending weekends planting flowers along sidewalks and painting murals under highway overpasses. Her efforts caught the attention of other volunteers, many of whom were people she'd never interacted with before. At first, conversations were awkward. Karen struggled to find common ground, but gradually she learned to listen more than she spoke, asking questions rather than offering unsolicited advice. One Saturday afternoon, while working alongside a group of teenagers cleaning up a park, Karen struck up a conversation with a young woman named Maya. The girl was outspoken and confident, qualities Karen admired but sometimes found intimidating. As they picked up trash together, Maya asked casually, "So why are you here? Most people who look like you don't usually bother with stuff like this." Karen froze, taken aback by the bluntness of the question. But instead of getting defensive, she took a deep breath and responded honestly. "To be honest, I'm trying to make amends. I've done things in the past that I regret, and I want to do better. Being part of this project feels like a way to contribute positively." Maya studied her for a moment before nodding slowly. "Fair enough. Just don't let it be performative, okay? We see through that real quick." The comment stung, but Karen appreciated its honesty. From then on, she resolved to approach her efforts with genuine humility, focusing less on how others perceived her and more on making tangible contributions. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to observe Karen's progress from afar. He attended a few community events where she volunteered, noting her growing comfort in diverse settings. Still, he remained cautious, knowing that change required sustained effort. One evening, as they crossed paths during a neighborhood cleanup, Marcus decided to broach the subject directly. "You're putting in a lot of work lately," he remarked, leaning against a fence as Karen sorted recyclables. "How's it going?" Karen paused, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's challenging," she admitted. "Some days I feel like I'm making progress, Other days I worry I'll slip back into old habits. That's normal, Marcus said gently. Growth isn't linear. What matters is that you keep showing up, even when it's hard. His words reassured her, though they also served as a reminder of the stakes. Slipping back into complacency wasn't an option, not after everything she'd learned. As winter settled in, bringing snowflakes and holiday cheer, Karen faced another pivotal moment. The annual Maple Lane Christmas party was approaching, and, for the first time in years, she wasn't organizing it. Instead, she offered to assist Marcus, who had agreed to co-host the event. It was a bold move, one that signaled her desire to collaborate rather than dominate. Planning the party proved to be a learning experience. Karen suggested traditional activities like caroling and cookie decorating, only to realize that many attendees preferred more inclusive options. Under Marcus's guidance, they incorporated multicultural elements such as storytelling sessions, featuring tales from different cultures, and a potluck dinner showcasing dishes from around the world. On the night of the party, Karen stood nervously, near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. To her relief, the atmosphere was warm and welcoming. Children laughed as they crafted ornaments, adults mingled over plates of food, and music played softly in the background. When Marcus approached her midway through the evening, he gave her a subtle nod of approval. "You did good, Karen," he said quietly. "This feels like a real celebration of our community." Tears pricked at the corners of Karen's eyes. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything. I couldn't have done it without your help." He smiled faintly. "You're welcome. Just remember, it's not about perfection. It's about progress." By the time the new year rolled around, Karen had become a fixture at community gatherings. Neighbors who once avoided her now greeted her warmly, and she found joy in fostering connections that transcended superficial differences. She started hosting informal coffee mornings at her house, inviting people from all walks of life to share stories and perspectives. These meetings weren't always easy. There were disagreements and uncomfortable truths, but they fostered understanding in ways Karen hadn't anticipated. Still, not everyone forgave her so readily. A few neighbors continued to harbor resentment, refusing to engage with her no matter how hard she tried. Karen understood their hesitation and didn't push. Instead, she focused on earning back trust through consistent action, knowing that reconciliation couldn't be forced. One evening, as she sat alone in her living room reflecting on the past year, Karen realized something profound. She wasn't the same person she had been. The journey had been painful, and at times humiliating, but it had taught her the value of accountability, empathy, and growth. More importantly, it had shown her that change was possible, even in the unlikeliest of places. Across the street, Marcus watched the lights flicker in Karen's window. Though he still harbored some skepticism, he couldn't deny the strides she had made. In her own imperfect way, Karen had begun to dismantle the barriers she had once erected, and perhaps, Marcus thought, that was worth celebrating. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but for now, Karen had earned a measure of redemption, not because she sought forgiveness, but because she chose to grow. As spring returned to Maple Lane, the neighborhood seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The snow melted away, revealing green shoots poking through the soil, and the air carried the fresh scent of renewal. For Karen, this season felt symbolic, not just of nature's rebirth, but of her own transformation. She woke each morning with a quiet determination, knowing that while she couldn't erase her past mistakes, she could shape a future defined by growth and connection. The final test of Karen's journey came unexpectedly one sunny afternoon, when Marcus announced he was hosting a community garden project in his backyard. The idea was simple yet impactful. Neighbors would come together to plant flowers, herbs, and vegetables, creating a shared space that reflected their collective efforts. It wasn't just about beautification, it was about fostering unity and collaboration, a concept Karen had once resisted but now embraced wholeheartedly. When Karen arrived at Marcus's house that Saturday, she was greeted by a lively scene. Children ran around with shovels in hand, couples dug trenches side by side, and laughter echoed across the yard. Karen hesitated for a moment, unsure where to start, but Marcus quickly ushered her over to a group assembling raised flower beds. "You're on planting duty," he said with a grin, handing her a pair of gardening gloves. "Think you can handle it?" Karen laughed nervously but nodded. "I'll do my best." As she knelt beside a patch of freshly turned earth, she found herself working alongside Maya, the same young woman who had challenged her months earlier during the park cleanup. They exchanged awkward smiles before diving into conversation, discussing everything from soil quality to favorite flowers. By the end of the day, they were laughing like old friends, their shared labor bridging gaps that words alone never could. Throughout the project, Karen noticed subtle shifts in how others interacted with her. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now stopped to chat, sharing updates about their families or asking for advice on gardening techniques. Even those who remained guarded softened slightly, acknowledging her persistence without fully endorsing it. These small victories fueled Karen's resolve, reminding her that trust was earned incrementally, not overnight. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus called everyone together for a brief gathering. Standing beneath a canopy of twinkling string lights, he thanked the participants for their hard work and dedication. Then, turning to Karen, he added, "And I want to give special recognition to someone who has shown incredible growth this year. Karen, you've been a vital part of this community's progress, and we're grateful for your contributions." The applause that followed was warm and genuine, bringing tears to Karen's eyes. She stood up, brushing dirt from her knees, and offered a humble smile. "Thank you all," she said softly. "This means more to me than you know. But honestly, the real credit goes to all of you, for teaching me patience, kindness, and what it truly means to belong." Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply with everyone present. For Marcus, watching Karen speak with such authenticity was a powerful reminder of how far she'd come. He realized then that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but transforming it into something meaningful. Karen hadn't just changed herself. She had inspired others to reflect on their own biases and assumptions. In the weeks that followed, the community garden became a symbol of hope and resilience. Neighbors gathered regularly to tend to the plants, swapping stories and building friendships along the way. Karen took particular pride in nurturing a bed of marigolds, their vibrant, orange petals blooming brightly under the spring sun. To her, they represented perseverance, the idea that even in difficult soil, beauty could take root if given care and attention. One crisp morning, as Karen watered her marigolds, Marcus approached her with a thoughtful expression. "You've done remarkable work here," he said, gesturing to the thriving garden. "Not just with the plants, but with people too. What's next for you?" Karen paused, considering the question. I want to keep learning. There's still so much I don't understand, and I don't ever want to stop growing. Maybe I'll volunteer more, or maybe I'll find new ways to support causes that matter. Whatever it is, I know I'm ready to keep moving forward." Marcus nodded approvingly. That's all anyone can ask for, to keep showing up and doing the work. Their conversation marked a turning point, not just for Karen but for the entire neighborhood. Over time, Maple Lane evolved into a place where differences were celebrated rather than feared. Newcomers were welcomed warmly, cultural traditions were shared openly, and conflicts were resolved through dialogue rather than division. While challenges undoubtedly arose, the community faced them together, drawing strength from their diversity. For Karen, life settled into a rhythm of purpose and fulfillment. She no longer sought validation from others. Instead, she focused on living authentically, embracing both her strengths and imperfections. Her relationship with Marcus remained respectful but distant, a testament to the boundaries necessary for healing. Still, she cherished the moments they crossed paths, knowing that his guidance had played a pivotal role in her journey. As summer approached, Karen hosted her first solo event, a storytelling night in her backyard. Inspired by the multicultural themes of the Christmas party, she invited neighbors to share tales from their lives, whether funny, poignant, or profound. The evening unfolded beautifully, with laughter and tears mingling under the stars. When it was Karen's turn to speak, she recounted her own story, her mistakes, her struggles, and ultimately, her redemption. "I used to think being a good neighbor meant enforcing rules and keeping things orderly," she admitted, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "But I realize now that true community isn't about control. It's about connection. It's about seeing each other as human beings, flaws and all, and choosing to stand together anyway." Her words brought the crowd to its feet, applause rippling through the night like a wave. In that moment, Karen knew she had finally earned her place, not because she sought approval, but because she had chosen to grow. Months later, as fall painted the trees in hues of amber and gold, Karen stood in her garden, marveling at how much it had flourished. Beside her, Marcus admired the view, his presence a quiet acknowledgement of how far they'd both come. Together they planted a final addition to the garden, a young oak tree whose roots stretched deep into the earth. "This will outlast us," Marcus said, patting the soil firmly around the base of the sapling. Karen smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Yes, it will. And maybe someday people will sit beneath its branches and remember that change is always possible, if we're willing to nurture it." With that, they stepped back, admiring their handiwork. The tree stood tall and strong, a living testament to growth, resilience, and the power of second chances. As the wind rustled through its leaves, carrying whispers of promise, Karen knew one thing for certain: Maple Lane and the people within it would continue to bloom season after season,